What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. It's your girl T. Louise. If you are new here, welcome in the room. If you are a regular, welcome in the room as well. Today is another episode of the Coming Into Womanhood series that I recently started. It is a series that is documenting my walk with Christ, my walk with coming into womanhood and becoming the woman of God that God has created and called for me to be. So welcome into episode 2 of This Is My Testimony. I did an audio version of this on my podcast. If you haven't heard it, you can go and listen to it. I do go a little bit more in detail than I plan to go today. But I wanted to share it primarily because a lot of people may not have heard the audio version. And I want you guys to be able to hear it again and see my face and my expressions and my emotions with it. My spiritual mom, she has taught me, and something that I keep a reminder of is, if we don't have a testimony, how will we win souls for the kingdom of God? So it is so important that we are being bold and we are being vulnerable and we are being honest about the transformations that we have experienced through Christ. So I will be doing that today. Okay. Let me get my notes up because I do have quite a few notes. I'm one of those type of people that, like, I don't want to go extremely far back in my life, but there are bits and pieces of my childhood from college and things that have led up to who I am today. And so I will be sharing those. So just to let you know, to give you a heads up. Okay. All right. So the first thing I want to go into is my childhood. My childhood was, I had a pretty okay childhood. You know, I'm not going to say it was always good. It was always bad. It just wasn't that. Like, I had a pretty good childhood up until the time my mom got laid off from her job. It was always me and my mom, like me and my mom against the world, nobody else. My dad was very inconsistent in my life. He was always in and out, in and out. He decided when he wanted to be a father. It wasn't something that he was always consistent with. Last year, God gave me a amazing revelation about my own personal inconsistency. It's something that I've struggled with for a very, very, very long time. But the revelation God gave me was, the reason why I struggle with inconsistency is because my father was the first person to introduce inconsistency in my life. And he showed me that it was okay for me to treat myself with inconsistency. And ever since God told me that, I have just been trying to break that stronghold of inconsistency in my life. It's something that I'm continuously striving to tear down by being consistent, whether it's with my podcast, whether it's with YouTube, which I just started, but I've been consistent, if y'all ain't noticed, okay, for a few days. But just being consistent, whether it's on TikTok, which I'm still fasting from, but all these different things and areas in my life, I'm trying to be consistent. I'm in a place where I'm trying to lose weight and work better with my health. I'm trying to be consistent in that. So ever since God revealed that to me, I've been trying to strive my hardest to be consistent in the areas I know for a fact I have struggled with consistency in, primarily with my relationship with God. I viewed God as my earthly father, and that's so disrespectful for me to do. Because God he doesn't even compare to my earthly father. I love that Jerry Flowers, he said that oftentimes our parents are the first representation of God in our lives. And I also feel like I struggle with performance, and I felt like I had to perform for God in order to get good things, or in order for God to show up in my life, because primarily if I performed well or if I didn't perform well, my father would show up in those moments. And so I cannot treat my heavenly father the way that I treated my earthly father, or view him the way that I viewed my earthly father, if that makes sense. I also believe that if my father was in my life and was consistent, I wouldn't have struggled with a lot of the things that I struggle with. Okay. Like, I just wouldn't have. I dealt with low self-esteem. I dealt with insecurity. I didn't feel love. So there was a lot of things that I was okay with accepting because I thought that it was okay. And unfortunately for me, my mom was the parent that she did everything, went above and beyond for me. She showered me with love. She sacrificed so much for me. And because I was seeking validation from a parent, because I was longing for validation and love from one other parent, I grew a form of resentment towards my mom. And I really struggled with that. When I was about, I think maybe around 9 or 10 years old, I was molested by a family member. And that situation opened me spiritually to a lot of things. I started to become sexually aware. My innocence was stripped from me. I think around 12 years old, I started watching pornography. I started masturbating when I was like 13 or 14. I lost my virginity when I was 16 years old. That molestation opened up a whole realm of things for me. And it opened it up for me to a point where I thought that in order for guys to like me, I had to have sex with them, and I had to basically defile my body to receive love. And honestly, I still say if my father was there to affirm me, if my father was there to affirm my the love that he had for me, if he was there to affirm my beauty, if he was there to affirm me, period, I wouldn't have been so open to being so sexualized and dealing with all the sexual things that I dealt with. Let me look at my list because I'm trying to make sure I'm staying on point and on key. When I got to college, that is when I probably experienced the most sex in my life. Sometimes I laugh about it because honestly, if I can't look back on my past and be like, I cannot believe I did that, and laugh about it, like not laughing about it like, oh my God, like it's funny, but it's a laughing like, girl, like I cannot believe you was doing that. Like I was wilding in college, y'all. I was wilding, okay? My mom was she sheltered me, so I didn't get like a lot of freedom or anything like that. And my mom she didn't play that whole dating thing. Like she was like, you going to school, you focus on your studies, that's it. No boys, no dating, no nothing. So when I got to college, I was like, this is freedom, freedom, freedom. Okay, I thought I was free, baby. I thought I was living the life. I was at an all-you-can-eat meats buffet, Arby's, okay? Arby's, we got the meats. That's where I was at. I was at a buffet, Asian, black, white, Hispanic. Girl, it didn't matter what it was, okay? It didn't matter. I wanted it. I just wanted it. I was hot. I was hot. I was fast. That's what I was. But when I got to college, I also started to receive a lot of attention that I typically didn't get back home. Majority of my life, I went to a predominantly white school. So I was pretty much around like the preppy white boys, and they really wasn't into me, but, they was infatuated with me. I was that girl, okay? I might've been a big girl, but I was that girl. Just saying, okay? I don't think it would have been like in a dating manner, but they were definitely infatuated with like my personality and, who I was as a person, but not to a point where it's like, oh, I want to date you, I want to be with you. So it wasn't like that. So when I got to college and I started getting all this attention, I'm just like, oh, they like the big girls in Memphis. Like that's how I felt. Cause I went to the University of Memphis. I went for 2 years and I'll get into that later. But when I got to college, I was like, And I started getting all this attention and, I was on all these dating apps and I started hooking up with all these different guys. And at this one point in college, I was messing with 2 guys with the same name. And I'm not going to even say their name because, just in case later on down the road, they're like, I remember that girl, But anyway, I was messing with 2 guys at the same time with the same name. And before, I know what you're probably wondering, was I using protection? No, I was not using protection. I was raw dogging, okay? I don't know, in my right mind. I was not in my right mind. Let me rephrase that. I was not in my right mind, because if I was in my right mind, I would not have been raw dogging. I'm just saying, like, all that sex ed that I learned when I was in high school went out the door. All them STDs we learned about, out the door. Out of sight, out of mind. Like, that's how it was. And like, I was operating in a spirit of Jezebel in college. I was very much a Jezebel. I was very much operating in that spirit. And I believe that spirit entered into my life when I was molested. Because it, like I said, it opened up a whole nother portal for me and the way that I saw myself and my body. But like I was saying, I was having sex with 2 guys with the same name. And when I came home from college for, I think it was either spring break or fall break. I think it was spring break. I was in excruciating pain, like excruciating stomach pain. And my mom, she thought I was passing, I think, kidney stones. And so my mama, she called my granny. My granny came with us to the hospital. My granny primarily was just there so she could get the tea. Okay, so she could tell the whole entire family. And I know what my family probably was thinking, she done came home from college. She pregnant. She done hid the pregnancy. Like, I'm pretty sure that's what they were thinking. And I was thinking it too. I'm not gonna lie. When the doctor came in the room and he asked my mom and my grandmother to step out, I was like 99.9% sure my sin had caught up with me and I was pregnant and I was not gonna know who the father was. That's how sure I was, and I was terrified. When he came in, he asked them to step out, and that's when I knew, okay, something is wrong. Like, why are you asking them to step out? They stepped out, and he told me I had an STD. It was a curable STD. It wasn't one that I am living with for the rest of my life. But at the same time, I will also live with that memory for the rest of my life. Now looking back on it, I can honestly say, even in the midst of me living in the world, God still protected me and shielded me and showed me grace, because I didn't get pregnant by any of the boys that I was having sex with. I didn't get an STD that I had to take permanent medication for. God truly showed me grace. Now, what I will say is I did have to deal with the consequences of my actions. This is something that I've learned on my journey with Christ. And this is something I'm so adamant about. People struggle with putting 2 and 2 together. The consequence of your sin and consequence of your disobedience. My consequence was bleeding. I had an abnormal period for months, years. I literally stopped bleeding in 2023. Like, when I tell y'all, I would bleed for 3, 4, 5 months, and then I wouldn't have a period for like 6 months. Then I would bleed for 6 months, wouldn't have a period for 6 months. It was very, very uncomfortable. It wasn't like regular bleeding. I'm talking like heavy bleeding, heavy blood clots, bleeding through my clothes. It was a very traumatic experience. And I know that it was the consequence of my sin of living in the world. Even then, y'all, though, like, even after that, like, I still was sinning and still having sex. Like, as soon as I was stopped bleeding, I was hunching again. Like, I know I'm laughing and it sounds like I'm joking when I'm telling y'all this, but this is really just my personality. And this is just me being honest with y'all. Like, even in the midst of that, there was still no repentance. There was still no, God, I'm sorry. Like, forgive me. I'm going to be celibate. Like, honestly, after I got the STD, I did chill out a little bit because I was a little terrified. I was like, oh, you really can get an STD. Like, I didn't know that. So I did chill out a little bit because I started bleeding like right after that. And then once the bleeding cleared up, I was like, oh, okay, let me try again. Let me test the waters again. But it's like, how often do we do that? Like, sometimes we do that with sin. Like, it's like, especially when we first come into Christ and we're not like fully surrendered. It's like, God, like, for me personally, like when I was dealing with weed, God, if you just let me get home, I promise I won't smoke no more. But then I go back to smoking. So that's how it was for me. Let me check my list again. So I spent 2 years at Memphis. And then my second year at Memphis, I got extremely depressed. I also believe that was another consequence, was mental torment from the enemy for my sin. This is why I say put two and two together. A lot of times when we are dealing with certain things, it's not always everything, but certain things where we know we have deliberately been disobedient, we are deliberately living in sin. That's when I feel like we should put two and two together and be like, okay, maybe this is happening in my life because I'm being disobedient. Maybe this is happening in my life because I'm deliberately living in sin and doing what I know God has instructed me not to do. I grew up in church, so I knew, you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. And, I grew up in the era where it was like all the elders were like, oh, you're going to hell if you do X, Y, and Z. So I knew the principles, like I knew the basics, but I really honestly didn't know why we shouldn't have sex before marriage. But knowing what I know now, I'm like, I know exactly why we shouldn't be having sex before marriage. And honestly, I would be lying to you if I said, if I could do it all over again, I would do it differently, because I honestly don't believe that I would. Before y'all be like, what? Let me explain to you why. I don't believe that I would do it differently because what I went through in life has allowed me to have the testimony that I have. We live in a world where people live in sexual immorality. They do drugs. They have sex before marriage. You have people who deal with homosexuality. You have people who are doing witchcraft. So you have all these different things. If it was not for someone in the world doing those things and coming to Christ, how would they help the people who are in the world doing the very same things that they used to do? So that is why I believe that I wouldn't do anything all over again. I would do the exact same thing just so God could use me to get the glory, so that he could get the glory. But anyway, that was a sidebar. I spent 2 years at Memphis. My second year, I became extremely depressed. And I decided that I wanted to drop out of college. I didn't want to drop out of college entirely. I primarily wanted to leave Memphis to go to film school. At first, I was thinking about going to California, which definitely wouldn't have been good for my mental health. I'm glad I didn't do that. So my mom ended up getting sick in 2017. And I ended up coming home at the end of my fall semester. When I came home, I thought I was depressed at college. I was even more depressed when I moved back home. I started drinking more. I started smoking very, very heavily. I know people like to say, oh, you can't be addicted to marijuana, baby. I was addicted. Anytime you are willing to use your last amount of money to get something, you are literally willing to sell products to get something. Anytime you are willing to steal to get something, you are addicted to it. I did all three of those things that I just listed. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. But I very much was using my very last dollar to buy weed. I remember I sold my laptop to get weed. I stole from my mom. I stole from my mom to buy weed. So I definitely was addicted to it. I was in a very, 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 very dark place mentally. My porn addiction increased in this moment. Masturbation increased in this moment. I was literally in a place where I felt like I was lost. I had no sense of purpose, no sense of security, no sense of self-worth. Like, I was mentally and physically and emotionally numb. And honestly, I can say that I smoked weed primarily because I wanted to feel numb. I didn't want to feel anything. And the moments when I wasn't high was when I felt like, you know how like when people are like, oh, I was fighting my demons. Like, that's how it would feel. Like I was literally fighting demons. I was fighting the sins. I was fighting my reality is what I was fighting. So instead of doing that, I just was like, you know what? I'd rather just be high and numb and not feel anything. So I really struggled with that. I gained like 60, 70 pounds. All I would do every day would be, my routine would literally be like, wake up, eat, smoke, sleep, eat, smoke, sleep, eat, smoke, sleep. That was my routine each and every single day. For from 2017 to 2018. 2018, I kind of like, it started changing a little bit, but not really. I was still smoking really heavy, but my mom and I were also struggling. We were on the verge of becoming homeless, and that made me even more depressed because I was like, okay, bro, like not again. Because we actually experienced homelessness before my senior year in high school, and we stayed at a domestic violence shelter. And that was a very depressing point in my life as well. I've experienced depression a lot in my life. God actually revealed something to me when I moved here to Atlanta, and I was like, oh, I'm so depressed. God was like, stop saying that. And I was like, but I am depressed. And God was like, no, you are experiencing depression. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was like, when you keep speaking that you are depressed, you are basically binding yourself to the emotions, the mental torment of depression. When you experience something, experiences are temporary. It's not forever. It's not everlasting. And so God started correcting me and saying, you need to start saying, hey, in this season of my life, in this moment, I'm experiencing an episode of depression, but I'm not depressed. And it took me a lot to start saying, oh, I'm experiencing depression. I'm not depressed. It took a lot in me to get to that point, but I definitely will say in the past, I was depressed. I was not experiencing depression. I was very severely depressed and attached, and I was in a bind to the mental torment, the emotions, and the ups and downs of depression. So anyway, my mom and I became homeless around August of 2018. And we started sleeping in our car. This part of my life was, I really didn't understand it. My mom started learning about what they are calling New Age spirituality. What it really is witchcraft, but that's another episode for another day. She started learning about New Age spirituality, and I won't say that my mom like fully denounced Jesus or God. Like, she still believed in Jesus, she still believed in God, but she was just mixing the two. And for me, on the other hand, like, once we became homeless, I was like, nah, forget that. Like, I'm a God. Like, that was the type of attitude I had. Like, Jesus ain't real. God isn't. Like, I wasn't really and truly believing in a higher power. I wasn't believing in God. I really didn't even really believe in Jesus. Like, because I was like, at this point, I'm like, if there was a God, like, why are we even in this situation? Like, why would God allow us to go through this? And I've been doing a lot of writing recently, and God is like, oftentimes people ask that question, but they honestly don't realize that even in that moment of asking that question, like, God is still showing us grace. The reason why my mom and I got into that situation of becoming homeless is because we were worshiping other idols. We were burning sage. We were praying with crystals. We were doing I forgot what it's called. What is that thing called? Like the unk thing, like whatever that was, like we were using that. And it was just like, we were in a place where we were putting other things before the true living God. And because of that, we had consequences. Because of us doing the idol worship and the crystals, we opened a door of idolatry in our life. We opened up a door of death. We opened up a door for the enemy to basically have a foothold. And baby, it was not a little crack. Okay. We left the door wide open, and he came on in, and destruction literally happened in our life. And once again, I just want to repeat this again. It is so important that we are understanding the consequence of our sin and disobedience. I used to hate the story about the children of Israel, but honestly, that is us. I went through that. Like, literally, me and my mama was worshiping idols. No, we didn't build no calf, but we had crystals and all these different things. So it was still an idol. We were still being disrespectful to God. And so once again, just be mindful of when you are being in a place of disobedience and whenever you're doing something sinful, and then understanding, okay, this is potentially the consequence of that. My mom and I were in our car from August to January before she passed away. So we hotel hopped. That was also God's grace, allowing us to even though we were homeless, he allowed us to have a roof over our head, whether it was in our car or in a hotel, because my perspective of that has changed now. Because when I was in the situation, I hated God, I hated my mom, I had resentment towards her, and I was angry with her. But now looking back at the situation, I can honestly say that it was God's grace that kept us. We were not, under a bridge somewhere, sleeping under a tent. We were not sleeping on the ground. Like, we were in a car. We had shelter from rain, snow, ice, whatever it may have been. We had shelter from that. And so we hotel hopped for a little while until it became too expensive, because hotels are expensive. And my mom, honestly, she just couldn't afford it anymore. And so we started sleeping in our car permanently. And I grew very angry in that moment. And my mom and I started to bump heads a lot. And we were not seeing eye to eye. Like, my mom was praying and believing in increase. And I'm, on the other hand, like, no, like, we need to figure this out on our own. Like, no sky daddy is finna come and make something happen. Like, that's how I was feeling. Like, excuse me, Lord, if that is, that's being rude, but I'm just saying, like, in that moment, that's how I felt. Like, you're believing in something that is not there. Like, that's how I felt. And I was like, we need to figure out how we're going to get out of this situation. And the more that my mama prayed, the more that my mama meditated, the more my mama listened to her worship music, the more my mama read her Bible, it pissed me off. I'm like, you cannot sit here and be like, oh, God is going to do it for us. The Father of the universe is going to do X, Y, and Z, but you're not doing anything to get yourself out of this situation. So I was so angry and so bitter that, I started calling my family. That was the worst mistake I could have made. But I did call my family. I eventually went and stayed like one night with my cousin Terrace, who is like my best friend, my sister. We grew up together. But she came and got me. And the guilt ate me up so bad for leaving my mama in that car by herself. I eventually went back the next day. And when I went back, I had to practically beg my mom for forgiveness. We had to have a hard conversation, and we both cried that day. And all I can remember is telling her, like, Mom, I'm tired of being in the car. Like, we have to do something. And she said, I know, me too, baby. We stayed at my grandmother's. My grandmother lived in like a senior high rise. We stayed with her for like, I think a day or two during Thanksgiving. And then after that, of course, the family at this point knew that we were homeless. And my auntie Linda, she stepped in to save the day. And she put us in a room with her friend's daughter. We rented a room from her friend's daughter, and we slept on a blow-up mattress. And, for some point in that moment, I was like, oh, I'm relieved. Like, we finally, can relax, or, it felt like I could breathe for just a little minute. In that moment, we were still burning sage, still with our crystals, still believing in astrology, still believing in numbers and numerology and angel numbers. There was no repentance. There was no, Lord, forgive us. Like, it wasn't any of that on my side. Now, on my mom's side, I'm not entirely sure. Because at this point in our journey of being homeless, my mom got really quiet. She didn't really talk a lot. Like, when I say quiet, like as if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and they're not saying a word. She stayed in meditation constantly. She stayed in worship constantly. She stayed in prayer constantly. And I just still couldn't understand. I'm like, I don't understand why you're in this situation, why you're praying, nothing's going to change. I just wasn't believing it. And so we ended up leaving from that place that we were renting because my mom and the lady got into it because the lady left the door unlocked and my mom locked the door. I honestly think the lady was a little off. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure she was. And because of that, the lady said, y'all paid till December 25th. After that, y'all need to leave. I was like, ma'am, the 25th? I was like, on Christmas? So we ended up leaving after Christmas. And just to backtrack a little bit, before we moved to that apartment, and the apartment was in the projects, y'all. Like when I say the projects, were like, the place was infested with roaches. Like I've never seen, like I've seen water bugs, and I think water bugs are the same thing as roaches. I'm not entirely sure. But when I say cooking dinner and a roach crawl over the stove type of thing, the good thing about it is we didn't have roaches in our room. And I think it's primarily because my mom had like sprayed and cleaned and everything. But if you go into like the living room and the kitchen, there was roaches. That was not the part I wanted to backtrack on, but I wanted to backtrack on before. So that Thanksgiving, when we had went and stayed with my granny, my mom's mom, our car had went out, like the brakes in our car had went out. So we weren't able to drive our car anymore. So before that, when we were homeless, we could drive around, we could go to the park, walk around instead of sitting in the car all day. We could drive to my mom's job during the week. My mom worked at Tennessee State University, which is a HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee. And, we could drive to work. We had transportation. So we didn't have that anymore. And so, my granny, she let us use her van because we told her the brakes went out in our car. I don't know if my mama told her we were homeless or not. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think she did. But she let us use her car. So we were driving my granny's van from Thanksgiving up until the time we became homeless again after we left the lady's house because we were using her van to get to my mom's job and stuff. After Christmas passed, we dropped the van back off at my granny's house and we took an Uber back to our car. So once we made it back to our car, I found myself even more angry because I'm like, okay, now we are literally back to square one. At this point in our journey with homelessness, I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I'm finna come up with a plan and we finna get up out of here because I'm not sleeping in this car anymore. Like I was over it. I was fed up. Once again, no repentance, no forgiveness, no surrendering my life to Christ. I was still practicing New Age spirituality, which is AKA witchcraft. So I'm still doing all of these things, but I'm angry and frustrated with my situation. So at this point, like I said previously, I was in a place where I was like, we're gods. I got to take this into my own hands and do what I need to do to get us out of this situation. So we started taking the city bus to my mom's job. We walked primarily everywhere. Once our car broke down, it was literally sitting in a car lot of a shopping plaza. It was in between what's that place called? Firestone. It was sitting in between Firestone and Goodwill. Goodwill was in this shopping plaza with like Big Lots and all these other stores. And then like a few blocks down was a gas station. So my mom and I, every morning, we would wake up, we would walk to the gas station, we would go into the gas station and we would wash up, we would brush our teeth, wash our face, and then we would wait at the bus stop to go to my mom's job. We did that every day for weeks. And so that was definitely an experience where I just will never forget that. Like, I will never forget what it felt like to have to use the bathroom in the rain. Like, my mom and I, it was a very challenging situation. And I think that going through that is why I never look down on people who have less than, like, because I've been homeless. I've been on the, homeless with nothing, not a dime to your name, just but the clothes on your back. And that's why when I see people who are homeless, or when I see people on the side of the road begging for money, like, I just never will look down on them, because that used to be me. That used to be me and my mama. And I always will have like a really soft spot in my heart for people who are homeless and deal with homelessness. So January of 2019 came really quickly, even though we was homeless, because I was like, it just came. I just want to give a disclaimer. This part of my testimony is a very emotional part for me. I'm going to do my best to get through this without crying or getting overly emotional about it. It is something that I have had to work through for the past 5 years. I've had to work through this. Let me see, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. 6 years. I have had to work through this. And I honestly just started taking it seriously 3 years ago. January of 2019 came, and I had finally finalized a plan to get me and my mom out of the situation that we were in. I found us a duplex for us to rent in Clarksville, Tennessee. It was going to be like $800 a month. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And it was like 15 minutes from my mom's job. And we were supposed to tour this duplex on January 10th of 2019. My mom and I had a routine of getting off at the bus stop at the gas station, walking to the car to get the gas can, walking back to the gas station to fill the gas can, walking back to the car to put the gas in the car to turn the car on to heat it up, because it was wintertime. On January 9th, my mom actually passed away. We were on our way to our car on the city bus, and my mom and I don't want to say it was an argument, but it really was. Like, we were having a disagreement. I had an attitude. It was extremely cold that day. And I was like, Mom, I really don't feel like walking all the way from the gas station to the car, back to the gas station, and back from the gas station to the car. Like, I just didn't feel like doing all of that. And it was already cold. Like, it was freezing. And my mom, I had an attitude, and I was very rude. And my mom was like, okay, do you just want to get off at the stop before the gas station? And then we can just walk to the gas station from the car, from the gas station to. I was like, okay, whatever, we can do that. My mom and I got off at that stop. And as we stood there, I still had an attitude. And we waited for traffic to clear before we crossed. And I just remember thinking in that moment, like, I'm so tired of this. Like, I'm so tired of being homeless. Like, I hate this. And the next thing I know, my mom pushes me back and she tells me to move. And I look to my left and I see a car coming. And I see a yellow light. And the next thing I know, my mom was rolling. She had got tossed in the air and she was rolling on the ground. And all I remember in that moment is running to my mom, screaming, crying. And all I remember in that moment is all the cars on the opposite side of the road that blocked the oncoming traffic. And I remember there was a nurse. There was an actual nurse. Once again, God's protection and grace. He actually placed a nurse. Like how often do you get into a car accident or a traumatic accident and there's a nurse there? She actually worked at the hospital that my mom was going to. She was a nurse. She worked at Vanderbilt. And she pulled over and I was telling everybody, I was like, back up, don't touch her. And she said, I'm a nurse with Vanderbilt. And she said, I want to help your mom until the ambulance get here. And so she was asking all types of questions, about my mom's health and if she was diabetic, if she had any allergic, all the questions I guess they supposed to ask. And when the ambulance came, I just remember seeing my mom. She was unconscious and the side of her stomach was busted open. If you guys have ever seen The Walking Dead, that's like oftentimes when I tell this story to people, I oftentimes describe my mom looking like something from The Walking Dead. Like her whole entire left side of her stomach was like you could see her guts. And I don't mean to be so graphic, but I have to be because I want you guys to understand how that later plays on my mental state. To see that in person, to see that and to be there. When the police arrived first, I do believe the police arrived first, and then the ambulance. When the police got there, they were very rude. Just want to say that, okay? Very, very rude. They didn't really care too much about my witness statement. My witness statement was literally like this big, y'all. The lady who hit my mom, her witness statement paper was like, this was her paper. Like she had all her personal information, and then her box for her statement was like this big. Mine was like this big. Okay, I don't know who. Anyway, hers was extremely big, and to this day, like I just recently found out what this lady looked like last year. I had no clue what she looked like because after she hit my mom, she got out of the car to check the front of her car, and then she got back in. She not once came over to me and said, "Oh my gosh, is she okay? I'm so sorry." Like nothing. I never knew what this lady looked like, y'all, till last year. And the police would not let me ride with my mom to the hospital because it was being deemed as a crime scene. And so I had to wait for the investigative, I think it was the crime scene investigators to get there or whatever. And I think they were deeming it as a crime scene because it was a pedestrian and vehicle accident. So I had to wait. And that took about maybe an hour, maybe almost 2 hours for them to get there. So I was outside in the cold for 2 hours, waiting on the team to arrive. Once the team arrived, the police offered to take me to the hospital, and I told them no. After the way that they treated me, I just was like, The nurse, Miss Donna was her name. She drove me all the way. She had just got off of work too. She drove me all the way to Vanderbilt. When I got to Vanderbilt, let me go back some. When my mom got hit, I called my grandmother first, and I don't believe my granny understood what I was telling her because she was like, "Oh, tell them to take her to Vanderbilt." I think she thought that I was saying we got into a car accident. And then after that, I called my mom's boss, and then I texted a friend of mine or someone I thought was my friend. But anyway, So when I got to Vanderbilt, my auntie Sarah was there. And I was like, why, how did you even know? My granny had called her, and my auntie Sarah thought that someone on the city bus, she thought my mom got hit by the city bus. So when we got there, the nurse, she came and got us, and she said, hey, your mom is coming out of surgery. And I was like, in that moment, I felt so much relief. Like on my way to the hospital, it was like I was in a daze, like I was in a fog. Like there was like no sound around me. Like I was just in silence. And when she said, your mom is out of surgery, I was like, oh, like I felt relief. Like I felt like, oh my gosh, like she's okay. Everything's going to be okay. And so they took us to a private room. And I didn't really know like what was going on. I thought they took us to a private room, because of, what the accident was. Once again, I'm thinking, because the police are involved, maybe they don't want, everybody in my business. So they took us to a private room. The officer came in the room with us and sat with us, and the doctor came in. And I was so relieved when I saw him. I was like, oh gosh, he's going to give us some good news. He came in and he asked me what happened. And I was so, like later on, like after I was able to finally like process everything, I was pissed that he asked me like what the heck happened. Because why am I explaining to you what happened and then the next thing you tell me is some bad news? That don't make sense to me. Anyway, so he asked me what happened. And I explained everything to him down to the T, because in that moment it was still fresh and I could still remember everything. And the next words that came out of his mouth were just not words that I ever expected to hear in my life as early as I did. He told me that they had did everything that they could, but my mom just did not make it. And I remember feeling like my heart just dropped. And my auntie Sarah, when we talked about it later on, she said that she knew that my mom had died when they took us to that room, because my auntie Sarah has lost a child and they took her to that room as well. So she already knew that it wasn't good. And I just remember like in that moment, I had so much like regret. I had so much anger. And for the first few weeks after she died, I blamed myself because, if I hadn't had an attitude or if I hadn't even been rude, like we wouldn't even got off at that stop, like we would have just got off at the gas station like we normally did. And also I want to shine emphasis on this, that my mom actually saved my own life, because I was actually the one that was supposed to get hit. But my mom prevented that from happening when she pushed me back into the lane behind us. And because she did that, she moved me out the way and she took the hit that I was supposed to get. So that really traumatized me for a very, 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 very long time. It traumatized me. And after my mom died, I had a lot of resentment for my family. I remember the nurse taking me to the room to see my mom, and she did not look like herself. Her face was crooked. She had bruises and scars, and she just didn't look like herself. She looked more like herself in that moment than she did at the burial, but in that moment, like all I wish was that she could wake up. Like in that moment, all I could do was like wish that I could take back everything that I did, everything that I said. I wish that I could have taken it back. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing that I could do. Nothing. And I hated myself. I hated myself. Because there was absolutely nothing that I could do. After she died, I planned her entire funeral. My auntie Brenda helped me with her obituary. But I planned her entire funeral. And after that, I went after her funeral. I don't remember anything from her funeral. I don't remember the burial, and I don't remember the service. Like, mentally, I was there, but I had checked out. After my mom died, I really dove into witchcraft. I think at that point, I was just like, I couldn't control her death. I couldn't bring her back. Like, there was nothing I could absolutely do in that moment. But I felt like I had made a vow to myself that I'm going to control everything else in my life from this moment forward. And I think that drive to want to control everything pushed me even more deeper into witchcraft. I started going to a psychic and getting my getting my palm read. I even was doing tarot cards. I even bought my own deck of tarot cards. I was doing candle magic. I bought a book. Like, this is how deep I was about to get. I had bought a book about voodoo. I was going to see a witch on a regular basis every single week. I was going to go see a witch who was telling me that my mom was a witch, my grandmother. Like, she was telling me all these different things. Like, she was telling me I basically came from like a line of witches, very powerful witches at that. And I was in this place of wanting to control. And because I couldn't control that one incident in my life, it sent me down a spiral. It sent me down a hole of wanting to control everything else. At this moment too, as well, I met my boyfriend Davion. Well, my husband. When we met, I was actually practicing witchcraft, and he was like really big on Jesus. He was really big on God, and I was just like, God is not real. Jesus is not real. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you need to come over here. And he was like, no, you need to come over here. And honestly, it's so funny because him and my mom have the same initials. And I always say now, like, my mom knew that I was going to need another anchor in my life, because honestly, I always say, like, if it wasn't for Davion, like, I probably would be a full-blown witch. Like, I'm just being honest. Like, I'm being honest with y'all, because if I didn't have him to bring stability into my life, I would have crashed out. I would have spiraled out, because I didn't have anybody else in my life who was going to bring me on a path of Christ. Like, it just wasn't there in my life. My mom was probably the closest thing that I would have had to bring me on that path of like reading my Bible. And who knows, maybe God would have called me home eventually. Like, maybe I would have came on that path on my own. But it just wasn't there for me. I didn't have anyone in my life to set me on that path. So I'm always extremely grateful for Davion, because he was always a man of character. He was always a man of God. Like, he just was like, nah, bro, I don't know what you talking about, but God real, Jesus real. And I was just like, okay, if you say so, whatever, you believe in your sky daddy, whatever. And I was in the wrong. Like, I was just in the wrong. And I practiced witchcraft for 2 years, I think. No, because me and my mom was actually doing it. It was like baby steps though. I was full blown doing witchcraft for 2 years. From 2019 to 2020. 2020, God told me to throw everything away. The reason why I ended up throwing everything away was, I'll never forget, I had went to Vegas. And Davion had called me one night, and he said, I saw something standing over the bed, staring at me. And one thing about me, like after my mom passed, I'm not going to say like I stopped being selfish or like anything like that, but a lot of my self-centeredness and like selfishness, it did dial back, because I was like, okay, life is really short. I became like obsessed with like apologizing and wanting to fix things with people because life is short. My mom and I literally had an argument, and then she was gone. There was no apology. There was no I love you. There was no I'm sorry, I forgive you. None of that. So I was like really big on that. And so when he called me and he said that, I was like, no. Not only is it affecting me, because I was also seeing shadows. Like I would get up at 5 a.m. and I would listen to my meditation music, and I would hold my crystals in my hand, and I would do all that crazy stuff. And even in that moment, God, once again, like God, this is how I know like God chose me and God needed me, or God wanted me, and I was eventually going to want him, because it was like I could feel the darkness and the demonic activity around me, but it was like they couldn't touch me. Like it was as if I had like the best way I can describe it is like it was like a force field around me, and they could only get so close to me. So it was like they could only do so much, but they couldn't go the full length of what they wanted to do or what they could have done. And once again, that was God's grace. God was keeping me. God was protecting me, even in the midst of me being disobedient, even in the midst of me basically selling my soul. I know a lot of people, try to equate selling your soul to only the music industry, but anytime you denounce Jesus Christ, anytime that you turn your back on God, you are literally selling your soul. You have already put your soul in a position to be for the devil. And that's where I was. Davion and I was also living in sin at this time as well. So once again, I was still dealing with my abnormal bleeding. And after I had gave the witchcraft up, Davion and I actually moved to Atlanta, which is where we live now. And I had gave it up. I moved to Atlanta, and I was like, okay, all that's behind me now. I'm no longer doing it. I'm believing in the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Like, I'm renewed. I accept you as my Lord and Savior. Girl, let me tell you, when I came to Atlanta, the spiritual warfare that happened, okay, the mental torment, I had several mental breakdowns. I was in a very, very dark place. I lost everything. Okay. I made so many dumb financial decisions when my mom passed. God had set me up. Like, I don't care what nobody say. He was still showing me grace, even in the midst of my disobedience. My mom had life insurance policies, and I was set up. I should have been set up for life. But I blew through everything, y'all. The only thing I do not regret doing is traveling the world. Like, there are other places that I wish I could have went to, but man, me and Davion went to Puerto Rico. I went to Thailand, which is one of my favorite places. But, it was just like, that's the only thing I don't regret is the traveling. But everything else, when I say I was buying pounds of weed, y'all, like, because I'm like, I'm not finna be buying no little ounce no more. I can buy a pound. This'll last me, a couple months. No, baby. I was smoking a pound a week, in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I was smoking a pound of weed. Like, I was high all day. I started having migraines. I lost my vision in my left eye. I was once again still bleeding months on end. I lost every single thing. When I moved to Atlanta, I barely had anything left. Anything. I barely had any of the money left that I got from my mom. Life insurance. Everything was stripped from me. Like, honestly, if it wasn't for my auntie allowing us to stay here in her old home, she was only charging us $600 for rent. $600. $600 is what she was charging us for rent. If it was not for her allowing us to stay here. If it wasn't for God's grace, we would have been homeless. Like, I'm just saying, like, because Davion didn't have a job. This was in the middle of COVID. We moved here in the middle of COVID. Davion was living off of unemployment. I didn't have a job. I'm living off the little bit of the rest of the money that I got from my mom passing away. I was using that on weed. I was buying weed like every other day. It was horrible. Okay. I gained, once again, I lost so much weight because me and my mama was walking everywhere. I think I gained like 80 pounds. Like, I was heavy. I'm heavy now, but I was heavy. And there was so much mental battles that I went through. Like, I thought that because I left Nashville and I left all that behind, that I was good. But there were still consequences that I suffered because of my disobedience, because of my deliberate actions of sin. And I was deliberately being disobedient, and I was deliberately living in sin. And so I didn't even stop bleeding. I think I said this already, but just in case I didn't, I literally stopped bleeding in like 2023. So even after me and Davion decided to stop having sex and give our lives to Christ and get married and all these different things, I still had to deal with the consequences of my sin and my actions. And the consequence of that was abnormal bleeding. I'm telling y'all, I used to think I was psychic. I would have full-blown visions. And that's another reason why I think my left eye going out is so symbolic. Like, I don't care what nobody say. It's symbolic for me to lose my vision in my left eye. Yes, some of it did come back. I have a lot of scar tissue. I have been to multiple doctors. Nobody can explain to me what happened, what's wrong. Why did I lose my vision? Nothing. I'm just now getting to see a neurologist this year, and I'm getting an MRI and all this lab work done, and hopefully we can pinpoint something in the physical. But in the spiritual, baby, it was a consequence. Okay, it was a consequence to my disobedience and me living in sin and putting idols before God. I always say the children of Israel, they had it the worst, honestly. You know, like when you go back and you read the Bible and you hear about God swallowing the whole generation up in the earth for their disobedience and, idol worship and things like that. What we have, we truly experience God's grace because we don't have it as bad as they did. Like, I'm just saying, like, just imagine if like God had swallowed me, my mama up in our car for idol worship. Like, that's the type of stuff I think about now. Back in the day, I wasn't thinking about that. But now I'm like, yeah, I was wilding. I was on the same path as the children of Israel. I ain't gonna lie. But I'm so thankful for God's grace and God's mercy because it truly is the reason why I'm even sane in the membrane today. Like, really and truly. What really led me down my path of transformation once, I told y'all about Babe being the man of God that he is. I had my first real mental breakdown. It was the first time in my life that I actually felt mentally sick. I'm talking about mentally ill. And I remember I was sitting on the edge of our bed and I was crying. And my head was so dark. It was so heavy. And I was like, I need to go to therapy because I didn't have the money for weed. When I did have the money for weed, I was smoking every day so that I could be numb. The reason why I wanted to be numb was because when I wasn't high, my brain was replaying the accident of my mom over and over and over again. So just imagine you trying to sleep at night, but you can't sleep because you replaying something. Your brain is replaying something over and over in your head, even years later. So I would just whenever I would get that replay, I would just smoke because it would get rid of it. So I wanted to be high every day because I didn't want to think about that. I started going to therapy. I was playing around, honey. I was wasting Davion money. I was wasting my money. I was not doing nothing in there. I was in there chatting it up with that lady. I was wasting her time and my time. But also in that time period, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And I'll never forget it. I was driving in my car. I was headed towards downtown Nashville. It was like 9:00 at night, and I was listening to Maverick City. And I think the song was I'll Wait on You. I think it's I'm gonna wait on you. I've tasted your goodness. I'll trust in your promise. I'm gonna wait on you. Or something like that. I was listening to that song and I started bawling, crying. And I was just like, Lord, I accept you as my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I believe that you rose. I believe that you died and rose on the third day. Like, I just started saying whatever came to my mind because I was just like, this is what we're supposed to do, right? And then after that, me and Davion, we decided to stop having sex. We found a church home. We did premarital counseling, but honestly, like even before all that, like me and Davion were on the verge of breaking up. I was in a very dark space. I had cheated emotionally, didn't cheat physically, but emotionally it's also cheating. We were talking about taking a break, and I just knew that if we took a break, we wouldn't be together. Like, I just knew it was just no coming back from that. But that night, that was the night that I really found Jesus for myself. And since then, God has just been transforming me. Like I said, we did premarital counseling. We found a church home. I met my spiritual mom 2 years ago, which that's nobody but God within itself. Like, she reminds me so much of my mom. Like when I say so much, like just like little stuff, even like her dreams and her visions for our ministry. It's stuff that me and my mom used to talk about, like visions that my mom and I used to share. And I'm just like, that's crazy. I'm never forget when God woke me up out of my sleep by the smell of dog poop, y'all. And this was a night where I was still in therapy. I think this was like my first year in the trauma therapy. And God woke me up by the smell of dog poop. And I got up and I started looking around for dog poop. I'm like, who done pooped in my room? Because we was watching My Friend Dog at the time. And I was like, she a little sneaky dog. So I was like, she done pooped. And I was pissed. So I got up, I started looking around. And as soon as I got like wide awake, the smell went away. And I just could not go back to sleep. And God later on revealed to me that was the stench of my heart. The grief, the depression, the anger, the selfishness, all the things that I was dealing with within my heart. That was what it smelled like. And I was like, ooh, that don't smell good. And God was like, your heart literally has plaque over it. And God gave me a vision of like him, like chiseling the tartar off. Like, you know how like people have plaque and tartar on their teeth? He was literally chiseling that off of my heart. And that was the night that God had revealed to me that my spiritual mom was my spiritual mom. But that was also the night that I had to let go of all the anger and resentment that I had to God, because I realized that I couldn't move forward in my relationship with God. Like, it would be like I would always be like here, and every time I would want to, go a level up, I just couldn't. It was like I just was at a standstill and I couldn't make it past that level, and I couldn't understand why. Until that night when God revealed to me that it was because of all the harbored angerness and resentment and, grief that I had that I was holding on to. Like, I was angry with God. I'm like, you took my mom away. Like, I'm angry with you. Like, but how selfish is it for me to be angry with him for taking his child back home, his creation? I had her for 21 years, but, she was never truly mine. But that's the type of growth that I'm at now. Like, I never used to be there. Like, I never was there until now. And so last year, my grandmother passed away. my auntie Linda passed away. My grandmother actually passed away on January 9th of last year, which was the same day that my mom passed away. She passed away January 9th of 2019. My grandmother passed away January 9th of 2024. And we buried her the same day that I buried my grandmother. That I buried my mom in 2019. So that was a very, very, very emotional time for me. I also know where my grandmother and my aunt, and I would like to believe that my mom as well, because like I said, I don't know what she was going through in her moments before death. But I believe that she got right with Christ. Because I don't feel that she is somewhere, I don't believe she's in hell. I just don't feel that. Like some people, you just be like, listen, they burning. They down that fire. Boom, 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 boom. Bob is burning. Okay, sorry. But I don't believe that my mom, my grandmother, or my aunt is burning. I believe what the scripture says, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And when my grandmother and my aunt passed last year, and I know a lot of my family are not at peace about it, because I understand, when you lose people that you've had, for all of your life, it can be very sad. But I've had so much peace last year when my grandmother passed and my aunt passed. I was just like, I know where they are. I know that they're in the presence of the Lord. And so, all of that, everything that I have said has led me to who I am today. I am a podcast host. I am a writer. I am a soon to be, hopefully, a screenwriter. God has transformed my life in more ways than one. And if it wasn't for the blood, if it wasn't for Jesus Christ being obedient and sacrificing laying his life down on the cross, I would not be here today. I would not be here today. And I know this video is long, but my testimony is something that I felt like I had to share in entirety. I know it's small, because y'all, I'm telling y'all, I'm working on writing this book, which I'm hoping to release for my birthday this year. But which will give a broader, deeper scope of everything in my life. But this is basically like a small summary of my life and my testimony, because there's so much more that that I didn't share with you guys in this video that will be put in my book, and that I share on my podcast and all different things. But who I am today, the woman I'm becoming today, is all because of one, God, Jesus Christ, but also because I have lived in a world and I've done all these things, but it has also allowed me to be able to be transformed and used by God. And I think it's always important that you remember, if you are somebody who is struggling with your sin, struggling with your past mistakes, there is nothing you can do. Your sin is never so dirty that God cannot use you. God will use the dirtiest of peoples. I just sat up here and told y'all I was having sex with 2 dudes, had an STD. That's dirty, okay? It just, God can still use you even if you have done the dirtiest of dirtiest things. God can still use you. And I think it's so beautiful that God uses the people who have had the most mess. Because honestly, if God used a perfect person, somebody who never struggled with anything, if God used somebody who never struggled with addiction, nobody who ever struggled with molestation or porn addiction or masturbation, would you even listen to them? Like, how can you share about the love and the transformation of Christ that happens when you become a child of God? How can you share that if you never experienced that transformation for yourself? So I hope that this video encouraged you guys. I hope that you got something away from it other than my nasty past. But I hope that it encourages you to even share your testimony, even if it's not on YouTube, even if it's not on social media. Maybe it's within your church. Maybe it's within your community. Maybe it's with your friend. Whatever it is, make sure you are sharing your testimony, because you never know what someone else is going through and how your testimony will impact them. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you like, subscribe so that you don't miss another video, and be sure to join me next week on Monday, February 3rd for an all new episode of the Twisted 20s podcast. Peace, love, and blessings. T. Louise.